In the beginning, before time was a river, before light had a name, there was only God. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the deep, a silent, formless expanse of darkness and water. Then, from the eternal stillness, a voice of unimaginable power spoke into the void, a declaration that birthed existence itself. "Let there be light," he commanded. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and he separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night. This was the first day. In the days that followed, that same voice sculpted the heavens and the earth. He gathered the waters into seas and brought forth dry land. He commanded the earth to sprout with vegetation, with seed-bearing plants and fruit trees, a tapestry of life woven across the continents. He set the sun and moon and stars in the firmament to mark the seasons and the years, cosmic lamps in the grand cathedral of space. He filled the waters with swarming creatures and the skies with winged birds, and blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply." He made the beasts of the earth, the livestock, and everything that creeps upon the ground. And at the end of each creative act, the divine verdict was the same. It was good. Then, on the sixth day, God paused, his masterpiece nearing completion. "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," he said. And so, from the dust of the ground, God formed man and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man, Adam, became a living soul. And God planted a garden in the east, in Eden, a paradise of beauty and provision. There he placed the man, to work it and to keep it. But God saw that it was not good for the man to be alone. So he caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and from his side he fashioned a woman, Eve. Adam awoke and beheld her, flesh of his flesh and bone of his bone. They were naked and unashamed, dwelling in perfect harmony with their Creator in the cool of the day. In the heart of the garden stood two trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God gave them one command, a single boundary in a world of freedom. "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." A shadow fell upon the perfection of Eden. It moved with cunning and spoke with a silver tongue. A serpent, more crafty than any other beast, approached the woman. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? He hissed, twisting the word of the Creator into a question of his goodness. Eve recited the command, but the serpent pressed his advantage, planting the first seed of doubt. "You will not surely die," he whispered, a direct contradiction to the divine decree. "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The promise was intoxicating, equality with the Creator. The fruit looked good for food, a delight to the eyes, and desirable to make one wise. She took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, and he ate. In that moment, innocence shattered. Their eyes were opened, not to divinity, but to their own shame. They saw their nakedness and stitched fig leaves together, a futile attempt to cover the guilt that now clung to them. When they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden, they hid. The voice that once brought comfort now brought terror. "Where are you?" God called, a question not of location, but of condition. Their confession was laced with blame. The man blamed the woman, and the woman blamed the serpent. The judgment was swift and sorrowful. The serpent was cursed to crawl on its belly, an eternal enmity placed between its offspring and the offspring of the woman. The woman was cursed with pain in childbirth and a fractured relationship with her husband. The man was cursed to toil, to wring his sustenance from a ground that would now yield thorns and thistles. And for all, the final decree was death. "For you are dust, and to dust you shall return." They were cast out of the garden, and at the east of Eden, God placed cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life. The world outside paradise became the stage for their descendants. Their firstborn son, Cain, a tiller of the ground, brought an offering that was rejected, while his brother Abel, a keeper of sheep, found favor. Envy took root in Cain's heart, a darkness that led him to rise up against his brother in the field and spill the first innocent blood upon the earth. The stain of sin began to spread, a deep and tragic wound upon the human soul. As generations passed, the wickedness of man grew great upon the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The world, once declared good, was now corrupt and filled with violence. And it grieved the Lord that he had made man. A profound sorrow settled in the heart of the Creator, who saw that the world he had made required a cleansing, a washing away of the rampant sin that had scarred it. Yet in the midst of this pervasive darkness, one man found grace in the eyes of the Lord. His name was Noah. He was a righteous man, blameless in his generation, a man who walked with God. To Noah, God revealed his plan, a great flood, a deluge of water that would cover the entire earth and destroy all flesh in which was the breath of life. But I will establish my covenant with you, God declared. He gave Noah precise instructions to build an ark, a massive vessel of gopher wood, with rooms and a roof, sealed with pitch. Into this ark, Noah was to bring his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, and 2 of every kind of living creature, male and female, to keep them alive. Noah did all that God commanded him. For years he toiled, a spectacle of faith in a faithless world. Then the day came. The animals entered the ark, and Noah and his family followed. Then the Lord shut him in. For 7 days a tense silence hung in the air. Then the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. The waters rose, lifting the ark high above the drowning world, a lone vessel of hope on an ocean of judgment. Everything on dry land perished. Only Noah and those with him in the ark remained. After 150 days, God remembered Noah. He sent a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters began to recede. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. When the ground was finally dry, God commanded them to emerge into a clean, new world. Noah's first act was to build an altar and offer a sacrifice, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and he made a promise, a covenant sealed by a rainbow in the clouds, that never again would a flood destroy all flesh. Generations later, humanity, united in language, settled in the land of Shinar. In their pride, they sought to make a name for themselves, to build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us not be dispersed over the face of the whole earth, they schemed. But God saw their arrogant ambition. He came down and confused their language, so that they could not understand one another. And from there, the Lord dispersed them over the face of the whole earth. The age of one people was over. From this scattered humanity, God would choose one man, a man from Ur of the Chaldees, named Abram, to be the father of a new nation, a nation through which all the families of the earth would one day be blessed. The call of God came to Abram with the weight of destiny. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, the Lord commanded. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. It was a promise rooted in pure grace, even to a childless man in his old age. Abram, whose name meant exalted father, obeyed. He journeyed with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot to the land of Canaan, a land God promised to his offspring. Yet the years passed, and Sarai remained barren. Doubt began to creep in. But God appeared to Abram in a vision, taking him outside to gaze at the night sky. Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them, God said. So shall your offspring be. And Abram believed the Lord, and it was counted to him as righteousness. Still the promise tarried. Sarai, in her desperation, gave her Egyptian servant Hagar to Abram, and she bore him a son, Ishmael. But this was not the child of the promise. Years later, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him again, reaffirming the covenant. He changed Abram's name to Abraham, father of a multitude, and Sarai's name to Sarah, princess. And he declared, "I will give you a son by her." Sarah, eavesdropping, laughed in disbelief. But God replied, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" At the appointed time, Sarah conceived and bore a son, Isaac, the child of laughter, the heir of the covenant. The promise was fulfilled. The greatest test of Abraham's faith was yet to come. God spoke to him, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering." Abraham rose early, his heart heavy, but his obedience resolute. He journeyed for 3 days with his son. "My father," Isaac said, "behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham's reply was steeped in a faith that defied circumstance. "God will provide for himself the lamb, my son." On the mountain, he built the altar, bound his beloved son, and raised the knife. At the final moment, the angel of the Lord called out, stopping his hand. "Do not lay your hand on the boy," the angel cried, "for now I know that you fear God." A ram, caught in a thicket, was provided as the substitute. The covenant was confirmed with a mighty oath. From Isaac came Jacob, who wrestled with God and was renamed Israel. And from Jacob came 12 sons, the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of a nation yet to be born. Among them was one favored by his father, a dreamer named Joseph. His brothers, consumed by jealousy, would set in motion a chain of events that would lead the family down into the heart of a foreign empire, into the land of Egypt. Joseph, the favored son of Jacob, was a boy of 17, draped in a coat of many colors, a symbol of his father's love that became a banner for his brother's hatred. He dreamed dreams of dominion, of sheaves of grain and celestial bodies bowing before him. These visions, shared with youthful arrogance, fanned the flames of resentment into a scorching fire. One day, when his brothers were pasturing their flocks, they saw him coming from afar. "Behold, this dreamer comes," they sneered. They conspired to kill him, to throw him into a pit and claim a wild beast had devoured him. Only Reuben, the eldest, sought to spare him, intending to rescue him later. They stripped Joseph of his coat, the vibrant threads now mocking him, and cast him into an empty cistern. But their plot shifted when a caravan of Ishmaelites appeared, merchants on their way to Egypt. Judah proposed a crueler, more profitable fate. "Let us sell him." And so, for 20 shekels of silver, the son of the covenant was sold into slavery. The brothers dipped his precious coat in the blood of a goat and presented the stained garment to their father. Jacob's grief was inconsolable, a raw wound that would fester for over 2 decades. Meanwhile, Joseph was taken down to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. The Lord was with Joseph, and he found favor in his master's house, rising to a position of great trust. But his integrity was tested when Potiphar's wife sought to seduce him. He fled her advances, but she, spurned and vengeful, falsely accused him. Joseph was thrown into prison, his world shrinking from a pit to a dungeon. Yet even there, in the darkness, the Lord had not abandoned him. He was given charge over the other prisoners and granted the ability to interpret dreams. He correctly interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, but the cupbearer, once restored to his position, forgot Joseph. For 2 more years, he languished, forgotten by man, but not by God. Then Pharaoh himself was troubled by dreams, visions of 7 fat cows devoured by 7 lean ones, and 7 plump ears of grain swallowed by 7 thin ones. None of his magicians could interpret them. It was then the cupbearer remembered the Hebrew in the prison. Joseph was summoned before the most powerful man in the world. He stood before Pharaoh, not in his own strength, but in God's. "It is not in me," Joseph declared. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. He revealed the meaning of the dreams. 7 years of great plenty would be followed by 7 years of devastating famine. He advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise man to store up grain during the years of abundance. Pharaoh, seeing the Spirit of God in him, appointed Joseph himself, making him second in command over all of Egypt. The reversal of fortune was absolute. From the pit to the prison to the palace, Joseph's journey was a testament to a divine plan unfolding in its own time. The 7 years of plenty came as Joseph had foretold, and he gathered grain in immense quantities, like the sand of the sea. But then the years of famine began to bite, and its grip was felt not only in Egypt, but in all the surrounding lands, including Canaan, where Jacob and his sons now suffered. Hearing there was grain in Egypt, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to buy food, keeping only Benjamin, his youngest, at home. The brothers traveled to the mighty empire and bowed down before its powerful viceroy, their faces to the ground. They did not recognize him, but Joseph knew them at once. The dreams of his youth were fulfilled before his very eyes. A storm of emotions must have raged within him, but he concealed his identity, speaking harshly to them, accusing them of being spies. He devised a test of their character. He would hold one of them, Simeon, hostage, and send the others back with grain, demanding they return with their youngest brother Benjamin to prove their story. The brothers, tormented by guilt, spoke amongst themselves in Hebrew, believing the Egyptian ruler could not understand. "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother," they confessed, their 20-year-old crime rising up to haunt them. Joseph, overhearing, turned away to weep. When they returned to Jacob and told him what had happened, he was devastated, refusing to let Benjamin go. But the famine was severe, and their survival depended on it. Judah pledged his own life for the boy's safety, and a grieving Jacob finally relented. They returned to Egypt, this time with Benjamin. Joseph, seeing his youngest brother, was overcome. He arranged a feast for them, seating them in order of their birth, a detail that astonished them. He then orchestrated a final dramatic test, hiding his own silver cup in Benjamin's sack. As they departed, his steward pursued them, found the cup, and brought them back in shame. Judah, in a passionate plea, offered himself as a slave in Benjamin's place, showing a selfless love that was a world away from the jealous hatred that had cast Joseph into the pit. It was enough. Joseph could no longer control himself. He sent all the Egyptians out of the room, and then through powerful sobs, he revealed his identity. "I am Joseph." He cried, "Is my father still alive?" His brothers were frozen in terror. But he reassured them, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." He sent them back with riches and an invitation for Jacob and his entire household to come and live in the best part of Egypt, the land of Goshen. Jacob, seeing the wagons from Egypt, finally believed. "It is enough," he said. "Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The family of Israel, 70 souls in all, descended into Egypt, where they would be sheltered and multiplied, setting the stage for the next great act in their epic story. Generations passed, and the family of Jacob multiplied exceedingly in the fertile land of Goshen. They became a numerous and mighty people, the Hebrews. But a new Pharaoh arose over Egypt, one who did not know Joseph or the history of his service. This king looked upon the burgeoning Hebrew population not with favor, but with fear. "Behold," he said to his people, "the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." So began a period of brutal oppression. The Egyptians set taskmasters over the Hebrews, afflicting them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. The Egyptians' fear intensified, and they ruthlessly made the Israelites' lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. The cruelty escalated. Pharaoh commanded the Hebrew midwives to kill all male infants at birth, but the midwives feared God and let the boys live. In his fury, Pharaoh issued a decree to all his people. Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but every daughter you shall let live. It was into this world of terror and genocide that a child was born to a Levite man and his wife. He was a beautiful child, and for 3 months his mother hid him. When she could hide him no longer, she devised a desperate plan. She took a basket of papyrus, waterproofed it with bitumen and pitch, and placed the child in it. She then set the basket among the reeds by the bank of the river Nile, his sister Miriam watching from a distance. As divine providence would have it, Pharaoh's own daughter came down to the river to bathe. She saw the basket and sent her servant to fetch it. Opening it, she saw the baby, and he was crying. Her heart was moved with compassion. "This is one of the Hebrews' children," she said. At that moment, Miriam stepped forward and offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. The plan worked perfectly. The child's own mother was paid to nurse him, and when he was older, he was brought to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." Raised in the splendor of the Egyptian court, but knowing his true heritage, Moses grew into a man whose heart ached for his oppressed people. One day, seeing an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, he killed the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. When his act became known, he was forced to flee for his life, escaping into the wilderness of Midian, a fugitive prince with a destiny he could not yet comprehend. 40 years Moses lived as a shepherd in the desolate land of Midian, his past as a prince of Egypt a distant memory. He had a wife, a son, and a quiet life. But the God of his fathers had not forgotten his covenant or the cries of his people. One day, while tending his flock near Horeb, the mountain of God, Moses witnessed an astonishing sight. A bush was burning with fire, yet it was not consumed. As he drew near to investigate this marvel, a voice called to him from the midst of the flames, "Moses, Moses." The voice was the voice of God. "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. The Lord declared that he had seen the affliction of his people and heard their cry, that he was coming down to deliver them. "Come," God commanded, "I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." Moses was filled with doubt and fear. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" he stammered. He made excuse after excuse. They would not believe him. He was not an eloquent speaker. But God answered every objection. He revealed his holy name, "I am who I am," and gave Moses miraculous signs to perform. He appointed Moses' brother, Aaron, to be his spokesman. Reluctantly, Moses obeyed. He returned to Egypt, and with Aaron stood before the mighty Pharaoh, ruler of the most powerful empire on earth. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel," Aaron announced, "Let my people go." Pharaoh's heart was hard. "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go?" he sneered. "I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." Not only did he refuse, but he increased the Israelites' burdens, forcing them to make bricks without providing the straw. The people despaired, but God promised Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh." Thus began the epic confrontation. God unleashed a series of 10 devastating plagues upon the land of Egypt, a systematic assault on their gods and their way of life. The Nile turned to blood. Swarms of frogs, gnats, and flies descended. Livestock perished. Boils afflicted man and beast. Hail of unprecedented fury rained from the sky. A plague of locusts devoured what was left. A supernatural darkness fell over the land for 3 days, a darkness so thick it could be felt. With each plague, Pharaoh's heart hardened further, a stubborn pride that sealed his nation's doom. The final plague would be the most terrible of all, a judgment that would strike at the heart of every Egyptian family. God would pass through the land and strike down every firstborn, from the firstborn of Pharaoh on his throne to the firstborn of the captive in the dungeon. But for his own people, he provided a means of escape, the Passover. The night of the final judgment fell upon a divided Egypt. In the homes of the Egyptians, there was arrogance and fear. In the homes of the Hebrews, there was obedience and a nervous hope. The Lord had given Moses specific instructions for their protection. Each Israelite family was to take a lamb without blemish, slaughter it at twilight, and paint its blood on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of their house. For the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians. He had declared, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you. They were to eat the lamb roasted with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, and they were to eat it in haste, with their sandals on their feet and their staff in their hand, ready for a journey. At midnight, a great cry arose throughout the land of Egypt, for the Lord had struck down every firstborn son. There was not a house where someone was not dead. The divine judgment was complete and terrifying. Pharaoh, his own son now dead, summoned Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night. His pride was shattered. "Up, go out from among my people," he commanded. "Go, serve the Lord, as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds, and be gone, and bless me also." The Egyptians urged the people to leave quickly, pressing upon them silver and gold and clothing, a plundering of the wealth of their oppressors. And so, after 430 years of bondage, the children of Israel, some 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, marched out of Egypt. They marched not as fleeing slaves, but as a liberated army, guided by God himself. The Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light. But Pharaoh's heart hardened one last time. Regretting his decision, he mustered his army, his 600 elite chariots and all the chariots of Egypt, and pursued them. He cornered the Israelites against the banks of the Red Sea. Trapped, with the sea before them and the might of the Egyptian army behind them, the people were terrified. "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness?" They cried to Moses, but Moses stood firm. "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord," he proclaimed. "The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." Then, as the pillar of cloud moved to stand between the Israelites and the Egyptians, plunging the pursuers into darkness, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. All that night, the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind and made the sea dry land. The waters were divided, forming a wall on their right hand and on their left. The Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. The Egyptians pursued them into the midst of the sea, but God threw their army into a panic. At the morning watch, the Lord commanded Moses again, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians." Moses obeyed, and the sea returned to its normal course, swallowing the entire army of Pharaoh. Not a single one of them survived. On the far shore, the people of Israel saw the great work the Lord had done. They feared the Lord, and they believed in him and in his servant Moses. Freed from the bonds of Egypt, the nation of Israel now faced a new and formidable challenge. the vast and unforgiving wilderness of Sinai. Their journey to the Promised Land would not be a short one. It was to be a period of testing, of shaping a nation of slaves into a people fit to be called God's own. The initial euphoria of their deliverance quickly faded as they faced the harsh realities of the desert. They grumbled for water, and God provided, turning bitter waters sweet at Marah. They complained of hunger, longing for the flesh pots of Egypt. In response, God rained down manna from heaven, a daily bread that would sustain them for 40 years, and sent quail upon the camp. At every step, their faith was tested, and at every test, God proved his faithfulness. 3 months after their departure from Egypt, they arrived at the foot of Mount Sinai. The mountain was shrouded in a thick cloud, with thunder, lightning, and the loud blast of a trumpet. The people trembled as God descended upon the mountain in fire. He called Moses to the summit to establish his covenant with them. It was there, amidst the terrifying glory of the divine presence, that God spoke the 10 Commandments, the moral foundation for their society, laws of worship dictating their relationship with him, and laws of conduct governing their relationships with one another. I am the Lord your God, he began. You shall have no other gods before me. He gave them the law, a perfect standard of righteousness. The people, awestruck, agreed to the covenant. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. They vowed. Moses remained on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving detailed instructions for the construction of the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where God's presence would dwell among them. But down below, the people grew restless. They came to Aaron and demanded, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us." In a moment of profound weakness, Aaron complied. He collected their gold earrings and fashioned a golden calf, an idol. "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt," they proclaimed, engaging in pagan revelry. God's anger burned against them, but Moses interceded, pleading for the people. He descended the mountain, and seeing the idolatry, his own anger flared. He shattered the stone tablets on which God himself had written the law. He burned the calf, ground it to powder, and made the people drink it. After punishing the instigators, he ascended the mountain again to plead for mercy. God, in his grace, renewed the covenant. For 40 years, that generation wandered the wilderness, their grumbling and rebellion preventing them from entering the Promised Land. They were a stiff-necked people, constantly testing the patience of God, yet constantly sustained by his miraculous provision. It was a long, painful lesson in dependence and faith. Finally, having led them to the very edge of Canaan, an aged Moses ascended Mount Nebo. He looked out and saw the land of promise, a land he would not enter. There he died, and God himself buried him, closing the chapter on the great lawgiver who had spoken with God face to face. The mantle of leadership passed from Moses to Joshua, a man filled with the spirit of wisdom, who had been Moses' faithful aide. The Lord commissioned him with a solemn charge and a powerful promise. "As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and very courageous." The task before him was immense, to lead the new generation of Israelites across the Jordan River and into the land of Canaan, a land inhabited by powerful and warlike peoples. Their first obstacle was the fortified city of Jericho. Joshua sent 2 spies into the city, who were sheltered by a prostitute named Rahab. She had heard of the God of Israel, of his mighty deeds in Egypt and the wilderness, and her heart had melted with fear and faith. She hid the spies in exchange for the safety of her family when the city fell. Her house, marked by a scarlet cord hanging from the window, would be a symbol of salvation in the midst of destruction. At God's command, the people prepared for a miracle. The priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant stepped into the flood-swollen Jordan River, and as their feet touched the water, the river stopped flowing, piling up in a heap upstream. The entire nation crossed over on dry ground. The conquest had begun. For the Battle of Jericho, God prescribed a strategy that defied all military logic. For 6 days, the Israelite army and priests were to march around the city once in silence. On the 7th day, they were to march around it 7 times. At the final circuit, the priests would blow their trumpets, and the people were to shout with a great shout. Joshua obeyed without question. On the 7th day, as the trumpets blared and the mighty war cry of Israel rose to the heavens, the impossible happened. The massive walls of Jericho crumbled and fell flat. The Israelites charged straight into the city and utterly destroyed it, sparing only Rahab and her family. The victory at Jericho was a clear sign that the battle was the Lord's. Over the next several years, Joshua led a series of brilliant military campaigns, conquering king after king and city after city. The land was subdued and then divided among the 12 tribes of Israel. But after Joshua's death, a dark and chaotic period began. A new generation arose who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done. They abandoned the God of their fathers and began to worship the Baals and the Ashtoreth, the false gods of the Canaanites. Their sin led to a predictable and painful cycle. The people would sin. God would hand them over to their enemies for oppression. The people would cry out for help, and God, in his mercy, would raise up a deliverer, a judge. Figures like Gideon, who defeated a massive Midianite army with only 300 men, and Samson, a man of legendary strength, whose downfall came from moral weakness, fought to deliver Israel. But their victories were temporary. The era was marked by the chilling refrain. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The chaotic era of the judges revealed a deep-seated desire within the heart of the people. They looked at the surrounding nations with their pomp and their powerful monarchs, and they grew weary of their own unique status as a theocracy. The elders of Israel came to the aging prophet Samuel and made their demand clear. You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. Samuel was displeased, for in their request he heard a rejection not of him, but of God's own rule over them. He prayed, and the Lord's response was solemn. Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. God warned them, through Samuel, of the true cost of a king. He would take their sons for his army, their daughters for his household, their best fields and vineyards for his officials, and they themselves would become his servants. But the people refused to listen. No, they insisted, but we will have a king over us. God relented and guided Samuel to anoint Saul, a man from the tribe of Benjamin, tall and handsome, as the first king of Israel. Saul began his reign with promise, winning military victories, but his heart was plagued by insecurity and pride. He repeatedly disobeyed the direct commands of God, choosing his own judgment over divine instruction. His unlawful sacrifice and his failure to utterly destroy the Amalekites as commanded led to his rejection by God. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, Samuel declared, he has also rejected you from being king. The Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and he became a man tormented by paranoia and rage. God then sent Samuel to Bethlehem, to the house of a man named Jesse, to anoint a new king. One by one, Jesse's strong, impressive sons passed before the prophet, but the Lord rejected them all. For the Lord sees not as man sees, God told Samuel. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Finally, Jesse's youngest son was called from the fields, a shepherd boy named David. When he arrived, the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Samuel anointed David, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. David's rise was marked by his unwavering faith. When the giant Philistine warrior, Goliath, defied the armies of Israel, David, armed with only a sling and 5 smooth stones, faced him without fear. "You come to me with a sword and with a spear," David shouted, "but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." His victory was a legend, but it also ignited Saul's jealousy. David spent years as a fugitive, hunted by the king, yet he refused to harm the Lord's anointed. After Saul's death in battle, David was finally crowned king. He united the nation, conquered Jerusalem, and made it his capital. He was a man after God's own heart, a warrior, a poet, and a king who brought Israel to its golden age. King David's reign was the zenith of Israel's power and prestige, but it was not without its deep shadows. Though a man of great faith, he was also deeply flawed. At the height of his power, he committed a grievous sin, taking Bathsheba, the wife of his loyal soldier Uriah the Hittite, and then arranging for Uriah's death in battle to cover his transgression. The prophet Nathan confronted him with a simple parable, and David, his conscience pierced, confessed and repented with profound sincerity. God forgave him, but the consequences of his sin echoed through his own family, bringing strife and tragedy. Despite this, God made an eternal covenant with David, promising that his house and his kingdom would be established forever, and his throne would endure through all generations, a clear prophecy of a future, ultimate king who would come from his lineage. David's final act was to prepare for the construction of a permanent temple for the Lord, a task he passed to his son, Solomon. Solomon's reign began with great promise. When God offered him anything he desired in a dream, the young king humbly asked not for riches or long life, but for wisdom to govern God's people. Pleased with his request, God granted him not only unparalleled wisdom, but also wealth and honor beyond any king before or after him. Solomon's wisdom became legendary, and he built the magnificent temple in Jerusalem, a breathtaking structure of stone and cedar, overlaid with pure gold. The day of its dedication was a national triumph. As Solomon prayed, the glory of the Lord, in the form of a cloud, filled the house of God so thickly that the priests could not stand to minister. God's presence had taken its place in the heart of the nation, but Solomon's heart, like his father's, was led astray. He amassed great wealth, a vast army, and in direct violation of God's law, he married hundreds of foreign women. In his old age, his wives turned his heart away after other gods. The wisest man in the world made the most foolish of choices, building high places for the detestable idols of his foreign wives. God's judgment was declared. Because he had broken the covenant, the kingdom would be torn from him. For David's sake, it would not happen in his lifetime, and one tribe, Judah, would remain for his descendants. But the united monarchy was doomed. After Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam foolishly rejected the counsel of the elders and promised to rule with even greater severity. In response, the 10 northern tribes rebelled, forming the kingdom of Israel under a new king, Jeroboam. The golden age was over. The nation was fractured, split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. This division marked the beginning of a long, slow decline, a path paved with idolatry, corruption, and the thunderous warnings of God's prophets. The divided kingdom was a story of 2 divergent paths, both leading to ruin. In the north, the kingdom of Israel, established in rebellion, was plagued by instability and immediate apostasy. Its first king, Jeroboam, fearing his people would return to Jerusalem to worship, and thus shift their allegiance back to the line of David, set up 2 golden calves for them to worship. This sin became the benchmark for all the wicked kings who followed him. A succession of 19 kings from multiple dynasties ruled Israel, and not a single one was righteous. They led the nation deeper and deeper into idolatry and moral decay. Into this darkness, God sent prophets, fiery messengers who spoke truth to power. The most dramatic of these was Elijah the Tishbite. He strode into the court of the wicked king Ahab and his pagan wife Jezebel, and declared a drought upon the land that would last for years. On Mount Carmel, he staged a dramatic showdown with 450 prophets of the false god Baal. How long will you go limping between two different opinions? He challenged the people. If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. The prophets of Baal cried out to their God for hours, but there was no answer. Then Elijah prayed a simple, powerful prayer, and fire fell from heaven, consuming his sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the water in the trench around it. The people fell on their faces, crying, "The Lord, He is God." Despite these powerful signs, the northern kingdom did not turn back. God sent other prophets like Amos, who decried social injustice, and Hosea, whose own tragic marriage became a living parable of God's faithfulness to an unfaithful Israel. But their warnings went unheeded. Finally, after more than 200 years of rebellion, God's patience came to an end. The mighty Assyrian Empire swept down from the north, conquered the kingdom of Israel, and carried its people into exile, scattering them among the nations, where they were lost to history, the 10 lost tribes. In the south, the kingdom of Judah, ruled by the descendants of David, had a more varied history. There were periods of revival under righteous kings like Hezekiah and Josiah, who tore down idols and restored the worship of the Lord. But many of its kings were as wicked as those in the north. Prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah warned them that their covenant with God was not a guarantee of security if they persisted in their sin and injustice. Isaiah, in particular, delivered breathtaking prophecies of both imminent judgment and future glory, speaking of a coming suffering servant who would bear the sins of many, and a king whose government and peace would have no end. Ultimately, Judah followed Israel's path. They ignored the prophets, polluted the temple, and embraced pagan practices. The Babylonian Empire, under King Nebuchadnezzar, rose to power. In a series of invasions, they laid siege to Jerusalem, reached its walls, burned the magnificent Temple of Solomon to the ground, and carried the people of Judah into exile in Babylon. The promised land lay desolate, the covenant seemingly broken, the nation shattered. In the heart of the Babylonian Empire, the exiled people of Judah faced a crisis of faith. Their holy city was in ruins, their temple destroyed, and they were captives in a foreign land. Yet, it was in this crucible of exile that God proved He had not abandoned them. He raised up prophets like Ezekiel, who received powerful visions of God's glory, even by the rivers of Babylon, and Daniel, a young man of noble birth who, along with his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, resolved not to defile himself with the king's rich food. Their faithfulness was severely tested. When Nebuchadnezzar commanded all to worship a golden statue, Daniel's 3 friends refused, declaring, "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods." They were thrown into a furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, but they emerged unscathed, accompanied by a 4th figure who looked like a son of the gods. Daniel himself rose to high office due to his God-given ability to interpret dreams. He served multiple kings, and his unwavering devotion was tested when a new law forbade prayer to any god or man but the king. Daniel continued to pray openly to the God of Israel and was thrown into a den of lions. The next morning, he was found perfectly safe. "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths," he explained. Daniel also received a series of apocalyptic visions, foretelling the succession of world empires and culminating in the arrival of one, like a son of man, who was given an everlasting dominion that would never be destroyed. After 70 years of exile, as prophesied by Jeremiah, the political landscape shifted. The Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon. In a stunning fulfillment of prophecy, Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. A remnant, led by figures like Zerubbabel and the high priest Joshua, made the arduous journey back. They faced opposition from their neighbors and their own discouragement. But spurred on by the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, they finally completed the Second Temple. Decades later, Nehemiah, a cupbearer to the Persian king, heard that the walls of Jerusalem were still in ruins. With the king's blessing, he returned and led a remarkable effort to rebuild the city's defenses in just 52 days, despite constant threats. The priest Ezra led a spiritual renewal, reading the law of Moses to the people, who wept as they realized how far they had strayed. The people renewed their covenant with God. The city was secured, the temple was rebuilt, and a remnant of the people was reestablished in the land. Then, a period of silence began. For 400 years, no prophet spoke. A quiet anticipation settled over the land, a longing for the fulfillment of the ancient promises, the coming of the Messiah, the true King, who would finally save his people. After 400 years of prophetic silence, a voice cried out from the wilderness of Judea. It belonged to John the Baptist, a man clothed in camel's hair, who came in the spirit and power of Elijah. His message was stark and urgent. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Prepare the way of the Lord. Make his paths straight. He was the forerunner, the one sent to announce the arrival of the promised king. And then he came, not in a palace, but in a manger. In the town of Nazareth, an angel appeared to a young virgin named Mary, who was betrothed to a carpenter named Joseph, a descendant of King David. The angel announced the impossible. She would conceive a son by the power of the Holy Spirit. He will be great, the angel declared, and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Joseph and Mary traveled to Bethlehem, the city of David, to be registered in a census. There, in a humble stable, the child was born. They named him Jesus, which means, "The Lord saves." Shepherds, told of the birth by an angelic host that lit up the night sky, came to worship him. Wise men from the east followed a star and brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, honoring him as a king. As a young man, Jesus came to the Jordan River, where John was baptizing. When Jesus was baptized, the heavens were opened, and the Spirit of God descended on him like a dove, and a voice from heaven boomed, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Jesus then began his public ministry. He called 12 ordinary men fishermen, a tax collector, to be his disciples, to follow him and learn from him. He traveled throughout Galilee, Judea, and the surrounding regions, teaching with an authority that astounded the crowds. On a mountainside, he delivered the Sermon on the Mount, turning the world's values upside down. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. He performed incredible miracles that demonstrated his divine power. He turned water into wine, healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, calmed a raging storm with a single command, and even raised the dead. He declared his identity in unmistakable terms. To a seeking crowd, he said, "I am the bread of life." To a grieving sister, "I am the resurrection and the life." And to his disciples, in a moment of profound revelation, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." He was the fulfillment of all the law and the prophets, God in human flesh, walking among the people he had come to save. The ministry of Jesus, filled with grace and truth, inevitably provoked the opposition of the religious authorities. His claim to divinity, his forgiveness of sins, and his disregard for their man-made traditions were seen as blasphemy and a threat to their power. As the time for the Passover feast approached, Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, knowing what awaited him there. He entered the city not as a conquering general, but humbly, riding on a donkey, as the crowds waved palm branches and shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." He wept over the city, for he saw its impending destruction. He cleansed the temple, driving out the money changers, declaring, "My house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." The plot to kill him intensified. He gathered his 12 disciples in an upper room for a final Passover meal, which he transformed into a new covenant. He took bread, broke it, and said, "This is my body, which is given for you." He took a cup of wine and said, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." During this Last Supper, he revealed that one of them would betray him. The betrayal came from Judas Iscariot, who sold his master for 30 pieces of silver. Later that night, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed in agony, his sweat like drops of blood. "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me," he pleaded. "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours, be done." It was there that Judas led the temple guards to arrest him. He was subjected to a series of illegal trials, first before the Jewish High Council, and then before the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. Despite finding no guilt in him, Pilate, fearing a riot, washed his hands and handed Jesus over to be crucified. The Roman soldiers mocked him, dressed him in a purple robe, pressed a crown of thorns onto his head, and beat him mercilessly. He was forced to carry his own cross through the streets to a place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. There they nailed him to the cross, between 2 criminals. From the cross, he spoke words of forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." At noon, darkness covered the whole land until the 9th hour. The very sun refused to shine. Then, with a loud cry, Jesus spoke his final words. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," and he breathed his last. At that moment, the earth shook, rocks were split, and the massive curtain in the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom, symbolizing that the way to God was now open to all. His body was taken down and laid in a borrowed tomb. A heavy stone rolled against the entrance. The hopes of his followers were buried with him. The embodiment of evil seemed to have won. The chosen one was dead. The Sabbath passed in silence and sorrow. The disciples were scattered, hiding behind locked doors, their dreams shattered, their Lord entombed. All hope seemed lost. But early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, some of the women who had followed Jesus went to the tomb to anoint his body with spices. They arrived to a scene that defied all explanation. The massive stone had been rolled away. The tomb was empty. 2 angels in dazzling apparel stood there and asked them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen." They remembered his words, how he had told them he must be crucified and on the 3rd day rise again. They ran to tell the disciples, but their words seemed like an idle tale. Peter and John, however, ran to the tomb and saw the linen cloths lying by themselves. They saw, and they began to believe. Jesus then began to appear to his followers. He appeared to Mary Magdalene in the garden, to 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, and that evening he suddenly stood among the disciples in the locked room. "Peace be with you," he said, showing them the wounds in his hands and his side. He ate with them, proving he was not a ghost. One disciple, Thomas, was absent and refused to believe until he could see and touch the wounds for himself. A week later, Jesus appeared again and invited Thomas to put his finger in his hands and his hand in his side. Thomas fell to his knees in worship, exclaiming, "My Lord and my God." For 40 days, Jesus appeared to his followers, teaching them about the kingdom of God. His resurrection was the ultimate victory, the definitive proof that he had conquered sin, death, and the grave. He was not just a great teacher or a prophet. He was the Son of God, the Lord of life. He gathered them one last time on a mountain and gave them their final command, the Great Commission. "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." Then, as they watched, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. As they stared into the sky, 2 angels appeared, promising that this same Jesus would one day return in the same way they had seen him go. The disciples returned to Jerusalem, not in sorrow, but with great joy. They waited, as Jesus had instructed, for the promise of the Father, the coming of the Holy Spirit, who would empower them to be his witnesses. The age of the church was about to begin. The story you've just heard is more than an ancient epic. It is the grand narrative of God's relentless love for humanity. From the perfect garden to the broken world, through covenants and kingdoms, through exile and restoration, one theme endures: redemption. It's a story that culminates, not in an ending, but in an invitation. The resurrection of Jesus Christ is the turning point of all history, a declaration that hope is real, that forgiveness is possible, and that death does not have the final say. This story isn't just about characters from long ago. It's about the God who is still active, still loving, and still calling people to himself.